Hello and welcome back to this our 51st live stream. Manna Machines over Area 51. I also want to wish everyone a happy Friday the 13th. And it's good to be here tonight. For those not familiar with UFO lore, Area 51 was considered to be a place where a UFO had landed. What it really was the secret test base for the U-12 spy plane. But it's a very, very interesting thing that the U.S. government let the news run with the alien story rather than admit to its really top secret project. So, sort of in celebration of Area 51, we just named tonight's episode after it. And what is more alien than a Manna machine? And this is a reference to the Ancient Aliens episode concerning the Ark of the Covenant, where one of the ancient alien theorists said that the Ark of the Covenant was a machine that made manna, a Manna machine. So. With that said, we are going to get into the questions tonight. Like always, super chats have priorities. We will take some non-super chats at the beginning. I ask that if it's a question directed for me, begin the question with a Q and a colon, so I know it's directed to me and not somebody else in the chat. I scan for that, so if I don't see that, I just don't see it. I also think too. Also, only state your question once, okay? Because if you state it more than once, then it's very, very difficult for me to understand if I've answered the question or not. And if I do see your question more than once, I am likely to skip it, just because I don't want to promote that behavior. So. We're going to make one exception tonight, but in general, if you repeat a question, I'm not going to answer it. I'm not going to encourage, say, people spamming questions. Okay. However, if it happens to be something concerning, say, a Bible verse, or a verse in the Bible, or a something to do with an ancient language, please do give me a little context to the question. Tell me what the chapter and verse in the book of the Bible that you think it comes from, or what do you think the word means. So just to give me a little context. So, with that said, we're going to get right into the questions. We're going to start off with 3 non-super chats, and then we're going to go to directly into the super chats because we got a lot of them tonight. So, let's get right into it. So, our first non-super chat comes from the Cyravin, and he says, question, some use Exodus 21, 22 to 25 to teach that the Bible doesn't affirm the personhood of a fetus. Do you think the Bible touches upon the issue? All right, let's pull up the Bible. We'll go to Exodus 21 and it's 22. All right, and pull up the Bible. All right, we'll start verse 22 because that's really the crux of this here. The rest of it is not so much. And if men struggle with each other and strike a woman with child so that she has a miscarriage, yet there is no further injury, he shall surely be fined as the woman's husband may demand of him, and he shall pay as the judge decides. But if there's any further injury, then you shall appoint as a penalty life for a life, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, hand for a hand, burn for a burn, wound for a wound, bruise for a bruise. Okay, so this is laying out what's called the lex talionis. Now, the lex talionis is actually a way of limiting liability. Now, the issue here is that the injury to the woman here is an accident. It's not intentional. Okay? It's basically if men struggle, and that's the circumstance here. That's the sort of the case law, is that you've got a struggle between two men, and a woman with child gets struck by mistake. Okay, this is not an intentional. He's not hitting the woman on purpose here, and she has a accidental miscarriage as a result. You know, he's not aiming to kill the child. It just happens as a result of the conflict. Okay, so in case law, this is very similar to basically, you know, where say one Israelite picks up an axe, goes to swing to the tree, and the axe head flies off and kills his friend. Well, it's not an intentional, bad act. It just happened as an accident. And in this case here, what we have here is not an intent to injure a woman or her child, but it happens as a secondary cause of the two men fighting. So, however, if the woman is injured more than that, in excess of that, so, you know, you got the accidental, okay, the child, you lose the life of the child here, but, you know, if the woman's hand gets cut off for some reason, like, for example, you know, if the guy's whipping out a blade and takes out her eye or takes off a finger, you know, then the lex talionis takes place here. Then, because he removed her finger, he gets his finger removed. If he removes her eye, he gets his eye removed. So it's a way to balance basically what is an accident versus what is an intentional outcome, or what should have been preventable. You know, if two men are fighting, there should be no, and a woman gets struck, there should be no further injury than maybe, you know, a bruise. You know, that should be the limit to what happens in a normal fisticuff. If anything more than that is happening here, you know, that's a very serious situation. You know, and that's really more attempted murder, where, say, basically the woman gets in the way. So, a lot of these laws that we find are basically attempts to balance various potential situations. Okay? So it's not here that it's a misuse of this to try to use this to say that the Bible doesn't affirm personhood. It's really more affirming that a life of somebody can be taken by accident, even somebody who's in the womb. So that's what it's affirming here, is this is an accidental cause. It doesn't affirm one way or the other whether the fetus is a person or not. So, I do think the Bible does touch on the image of personhood in the fetus. It does it in several places. It does it in the Gospels. Like, for example, when John the Baptist is in the womb and Mary has conceived and is carrying the Messiah. You know, John the Baptist in the womb reacts to the presence of the Messiah. You know, only a person can do that. Likewise, the whole incarnation of Christ, where, you know, the Holy Spirit conceives of the incarnation in the womb of Mary, implies that the fullness of God becomes merged with the fullness of man, and Mary is giving birth to a person. It's an inevitable that, you know, the whole idea that Christ would not be a person until birth is something that would be completely alien to the Bible. I think it's even I think it's Jeremiah who says, God foreknew me, even in my mother's womb. And correct me if I got the wrong passage there, because I don't remember that one. But I do remember it in there. So if I got the book wrong, forgive me. Okay? So, the Bible does definitely touch on this issue. It definitely touches on this issue. Exodus 21, however, does not. It's talking about case law and what happens in the event of an accident. Okay? So, thank you very much for the question. I hope that answered the question. Okay, our next non-super chat. I'm not going to try to pronounce this. I'm glad you're here. I'm so glad you're here tonight. I'm glad you tried to teach me how to pronounce that, but I just don't remember how to pronounce that. So, mine is not my thing. So I apologize profusely, but thank you for being here tonight. And he asks, how did Egyptians keep track of years before AD BC? Okay, it's a great question. It's a great question. They kept track of years by using regnal years. Okay, so they didn't have, say, an epoch. And what we call an epoch is basically an anchor in your calendar that you can calculate any date according to. So for us, it's the birth of Christ, minus 4 years. Okay, but we have an epoch. The Anno Martyrum calendar that's used by the Copts uses the persecution of Diocletian as an epoch. Or sorry, maybe it's Domitian. But anyway, they have an epoch too of one of the years of the martyrdoms. Okay, so almost every modern calendar has an epoch that it uses to it. But the Egyptians didn't have an epoch calendar. They used a regnal year calendar. Now, the way a regnal calendar worked is it would start with the year of the king. So, it would be like the first regnal year, and then it would go into the season, what month of the season, and then the days of the month. And that's how they kept track of dates. Now, where things get tricky here is that as soon as a king came to a throne, he would be given credit for having an entire year. Okay? So, if a king came to the throne on, say, December 30th, okay, that would be his first regnal year. December 30 comes and goes, December 31st comes and goes, January 1st, he gets credit for a whole new year, year 2. This can be very difficult for chronologists to keep track of because it sometimes makes it there's some wiggle room there as to how we correlate their dates to our Anno Domini calendar. Okay? But that's basically how it works. It's basically on the particular reign of the king and his regnal year. So, like, for example, the longest reigning kings, up to 90 years. You could have, say, a regnal year up to, like, 89 or 90. And so that was possible. Like Papias II, he reigned for 90 years. He comes onto the throne when he's 6, and he lives to 96. So, he lives a good, long life. And then you got guys like Ramses II who reigned 66 years, But this is how they did it on all their documents, all their stele, on that. So this is how they kept track of dates, is according to the reign of the king. And until epoch calendars started coming into vogue, those were the way most civilizations did their dates. So anyway, thank you very much for the question. It's a great question, and I hope that answered it. Our next question, our third question, is, what is your interpretation of the command to destroy the Amalekites in 1 Samuel 15:3. How can God's command to kill women and infants be morally justified? Okay, now, I want to warn you about something. I noticed you post your question twice. Don't do that again. Okay? If you do that again, I'll ignore your question. Okay, just pure and simple, I won't. But I'm going to give you a pass on this one because I think this is an interesting question. It's a worthwhile question. It boils down to clan justice. Really, this is what it all boils down to. This whole question of how this is justified boils down to clan justice and how clan justice worked in the ancient Near East. Now, one of the dangers that we have when we discuss, try to fit this into our modern ethical framework is the problem of cultural superiority. We like to think we are really moral people. But, we're not. And, we do things that that people in the past would find absolutely abhorrent. Absolutely abhorrent. So we have to be careful not to fall into the trap of cultural superiority. So we have to be really careful here before we start looking at something and whether or not it's morally justified. Because we are not operating with the same information or the same understanding that they are. Let me give you an example here. I mean, we think wiping out women and children is horrific. Well, that same culture would look at the way we treat our children and say, well, why aren't you arranging a spouse for your son? You're sending him off in the big bad world, unmarried. How are they going to survive? How are they going to cope? That would be completely, when we consider it normal today that, we expect our children to get their own spouses. But in the past, it was considered to be the morally right thing to do to arrange a good wife for your sons. It would be completely morally repugnant for them to do what we do every day. So we have to be really, really careful about how we judge these sort of actions. Now we get to the part is why is it morally justified? And it doesn't come from 1 Samuel 15:3, but from Deuteronomy 25:17. And let's pull up Deuteronomy 25:17. They had their first. The Israelites had their first conflict with the Amalekites in, I think it's Exodus 17, where they have a full-on conflict with the Amalekites at Rephidim, and they defeat them at Rephidim. But in Deuteronomy 25, the Amalekites changed their strategy. And this is really important if you want to understand 1 Samuel 15. Okay. So let's pull this up. All right. And verse 17. Remember what Amalek did to you along the way when you came out from Egypt. How he met you along the way and attacked among you all the stragglers at your rear who, when they were faint and weary, and he did not fear God. Okay? What they did is after Rephidim, they changed their strategy where they picked off the stragglers, the women and children. Women and children are often stragglers. Your elderly are stragglers. You're weak and you're sick are your stragglers. The Amalekites were trying to dissuade the Israelites from using their resources by picking off their weak and young. Okay? When you get down to clan justice, if you've got a situation where if a situation goes on and they sense weakness, it can end up that the whole clan or tribe could get wiped out. If you want to read more about this, you can. There's a very good section on this in Clinton Bailey's book on the Bedouin. Excellent book. But it's essentially this. This is why, for example, if one member of a clan rapes the woman of another clan, that other clan will do everything in its power to kill not only the rapist, but its entire clan. And the reason for this is if that rape is not adequately addressed with sort of shock and awe, that clan becomes, it's like blood falling in the water amongst a pool of sharks. Every other clan will take the opportunity to pillage and take advantage of that clan, because it's shown weakness. It's shown it can't defend its own. So here we got a situation where the Amalekites have tried to show that the Israelites can't defend their own. So this is going to lead to harem, where the entire you get this condign retribution, and this is just clan justice. That's all this is. We don't do this today. But we have to be careful here not to assume moral superiority, because we're not in their position either. We're not in their position. If someone picked your pocket today, you wouldn't go and wipe out their entire family. But back then, someone picks your pocket, maybe people will see that, hey, you're a guy that's easily picked. Maybe your whole family will be easily picked. That's the way people thought back then. It's a different way of thinking. It's a different kind of ethics. And it's an ethics based upon the situations that you have in a tribal and clan society. So I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the question. Very much appreciated. Okay, now we're going to get on to Super Chats. And our first Super Chat comes from Brick Creation for $5. Thank you very much for the Super Chat. Hi, Dr. Falk. I am trying to learn Hebrew for understanding the Bible exegetically. But which Hebrew should I study? I heard there are many. Okay. Now, almost every textbook on Hebrew will only teach you one of two types. Modern Hebrew or basically Biblical Hebrew. Biblical Hebrew is really Masoretic Hebrew. It's really the Hebrew of the 10th century, 8th to 10th century AD. But we still consider that to be Biblical Hebrew because it's used in most of the major biblical Hebrew texts that we have today. So, you should study Biblical Hebrew if you want to understand the Bible. You will not be able to communicate well in downtown. I mean, if you study Biblical Hebrew, you will not be able to order a cheeseburger or ask where the bathroom is. It won't help you get directions to Tel Aviv, okay? But it will help you read the Bible because the language of Biblical Hebrew is sufficiently different from modern Hebrew that you would be better off studying the Biblical Hebrew. So it's one of those things where you are much, much better off for biblical exegesis studying Biblical Hebrew rather than modern Hebrew. So, and most of the other types of Hebrew are either not taught actively or they're just not they're specially niched subjects. Like, for example, there is a Babylonian dialect of Hebrew, which it's really not taught unless you do sort of Talmudic studies or are really want to be a linguistic specialist in that field. So, Biblical Hebrew will carry you a long, long ways. And you can always pick up other aspects of the language too. Like if you want to pick up a Paleo-Hebrew script, there's always that opportunity as well. But Biblical Hebrew is the foundation. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the Super Chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, Brick Creation again for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. Any recommended books to help understand the poetic language and symbolism and biblical prophecies? Any books to understand the ancient linguistics of the Israelites or how people would have understood? Okay, there is an anthology, and I think it was done by Eisenbrauns called Hebrew linguistics. But it's really advanced material. I wouldn't recommend it for someone just learning. Okay, so once you're starting to get into the ancient linguistics, and there's another one called Semitic Linguistics Workbook. Once you start getting into that level, you're pretty much way up there already. That's probably not going to help you so much in just understanding the Bible or doing basic exegesis. So, I would leave ancient linguistics to advanced study. Okay, get the languages under your belt first. Get your Hebrew, get your Greek. If you want to specialize in another language like Akkadian or Egyptian, get those under your languages. Get your firm foundation in languages before you get into linguistics. Ugaritic is another great language. So get that foundation in languages first. Then you can study linguistics. Now, a book to help you understand poetry and biblical prophecy. The best book I can recommend here is called The Art of Biblical Poetry by Robert Alter. Excellent book. It's the classic. It is the book. It's not a big book. It's not an expensive book. But it's the classic work on how to interpret a poetic language in the Bible and biblical poetry. And it's a great foundation for ancient Near Eastern poetry in general. So I highly, highly recommend that book. And again, it's called The Art of Biblical Poetry by Robert Alter. Okay? So, thank you very much for the super chat, and thank you for the questions. Very much appreciated. Okay, and then Brick Creation again for $5. Thank you very much. In Revelation 20, how could the 1,000 years be understood? Also, could the time be different between Satan being bound and saints ruling with Christ? Okay. The idea of the 1,000 years is called in theology chiliasm, and it comes from the Greek word meaning 1,000. We today more often call it millenarianism. Okay, but this is the idea that the 1,000 years is a literal 1,000 years of some kind. Now, it's not the only way to understand the 1,000 years. There are some people who think it's a euphemism, very, very similar to, say, the 40 years that we find in, say, the Old Testament in Hebrew. Whereas this is just a very, very large number, an extended long time, ages and ages and ages and ages. So it's 1,000 years. Not perpetual, but very long. So it could be understood to be 1,000 years, 800 years, 10,000 years. It's may not be precise here. So, chiliasm is one of those topics that's very, very much debated, and it always has been throughout the history of the Christian Church. You've had all sort of persuasions from, say, historic premillennialism to amillennialism, where this is just supposed to be representing a long period of time, but not exactly 1,000 years. So there's a lot of ideas here that float around regarding this. Also, could the time be different between Satan being bound and the saints ruling with Christ? Well, that's interesting. Because the whole idea of Satan being bound in a bottomless pit could have distortions of time and space. Because there's no such thing in our physical world of a bottomless pit. All pits have a bottom. It talks about an abyss, a deep, deep well. And it's possible that the rules of time and space are not behaving the same there. If we take, for example, relativistic time here, it could be that, that Satan could be experiencing time on a very, very different level than say, the saints ruling with Christ. I mean, there's the whole, Einstein, when he was asked once to explain relativity, he said tongue-in-cheek, time goes faster when you sit beside a pretty girl. That's one of those things, it is one of those things where, the saints ruling with Christ might seem to go a lot faster because it's so pleasurable. It's a good experience to rule with Christ. He's the master. He's our glory and our joy. He's our savior. He's our friend. He's the King of Kings. So, yeah, being in his presence will never seem long enough. It'll always seem like it's gone too fast. So, there could be an experiential difference in time between Satan being bound and the saints ruling with Christ. That's definitely conceivable. It's definitely possible. Even if the chronological time might be similar, it would not be the same. So just because one is experienced the same chronological time doesn't mean you're experiencing that time in the same way. There's a perceptual aspect of time that can be very, very different based upon your circumstances or your environment. So anyway, I hope that answered your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very interesting question. Okay, Brick Creation again for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Any evidence or possibility that the New Testament was originally written in Hebrew? I'd say no. Or was the Septuagint the original manuscript? If not, what is? Okay. Now, the Septuagint is actually the Greek translation of the Old Testament. It does not include the New Testament. So, the Septuagint is not the original manuscript in anybody's point of view here. The Septuagint, except maybe Gramican, but he's kind of a nut. He's a nut. But the Septuagint is a translation from the Hebrew Old Testament. But one of the things we find when we look at the Septuagint is there's traces of Hebrew that you can see under the hood. And this is true of just about any translation. One of the interesting things about translations is you don't completely eliminate the structure of the original language. There's traces of the original language that remain in your translation, just because the way the original language is structured. A classic example is when I read something in that's been translated from Egyptian. You don't find in Egyptian subordinate clauses at the beginning of a sentence. It's structurally not part of the language. All your subordinate clauses come after the independent or main clause. This is how I know, for example, that the Book of Abraham was not translated from Egyptian. It's because it has a lot of leading subordinate clauses. It does not look like a translation from Egyptian. It looks like a translation from Hebrew. Really, it's a copy, It's kyping from the King James Bible. Okay, it's kyping from the King James Bible. But I can tell, because I'm so familiar with Egyptian and Egyptian translations, that it has not been translated from Egyptian. Likewise, the New Testament bears no marks of having been originally, translated from Hebrew. Whereas you see that really, really clearly in the Septuagint. In the Septuagint, you can really sort of tell the syntax and the verses and all that, and how that Hebrew is underneath the Greek translation. Like, for example, there's a trace of it. Like, for example, in the Septuagint, Ralph's edition of the Septuagint's Genesis 1:1, where it says en kephale. Now, when my text criticism teacher read this aloud in class, two of us busted out laughing. We thought this was hysterically funny. And the rest of the class didn't get the joke. They didn't get the joke because only two of us were trained in both Hebrew and Greek, whereas the rest of the class only knew Hebrew. But we thought this was hysterically funny because en kephale literally means in the head, as in your physical head. But the undercurrent of this is Bereshit, the Hebrew, in the beginning, also has as its lexeme Rosh, and Rosh means head. So the Greek translator of the Septuagint knew enough about Hebrew that he tried to preserve that Hebrewism, probably not intentionally, but he preserved that Hebrewism in translating it as en kephale. So, you do find these remnants, and this is what makes the Septuagint so useful for text critical work too, is you get these remnants of the ancient language, of the original language in the translation. We don't find that in the New Testament. It's just not there. Not in a way that would make it stand out as having originally been written in Hebrew. So I don't think there's any evidence. You do have one statement by Papias, a early church father, that commented that Matthew was originally written in Hebrew, but the evidence isn't there. The textual evidence isn't there. So I hope that answers your question. It's an interesting question. Thank you very much for the super chat, though. Very interesting. Okay. Brick Creation again for $5. Thank you very much. I heard some good arguments from Inspiring Philosophy that El Haman is Sodom. Could it be any chances? What are the main problems with it? Okay, I don't think Tel El Haman is Sodom. And him and I have talked about this fairly frequently. I think he's almost at the point now where he might retract it. I don't think he has yet, but I think he's getting to that point because the whole argument for this being Sodom is just falling apart. It's absolutely falling apart. There's lots of problems with it. One, it's way too late. It dates to the 1650s. This is contemporary with Joseph. So, that's a red flag right there. The second problem is that Steve Collins is he's probably a decent digger, but he's not well trained. Unfortunately, he got his PhD at Trinity College, Bible College, and Seminary back in the days when it was still a degree mill. Now, I don't know the status of it as a degree mill today, so don't get on my case because I'm still trying to figure out if they've resolved those issues, and I haven't been getting any good answers so far. So, That's a second problem. Is and I saw him. I saw Collins. You know, he interpret the stratigraphy of the destruction layer, and you know he points to the late bronze destruction, or sorry, the middle bronze destruction layer at the bottom, and then 3 or 4 feet above it, a second destruction layer, and he goes, "Oh, well, that's just the roof collapsing in." No, stratigraphy doesn't work that way. Stratigraphy doesn't work that way at all. You don't get a destruction layer and then 4 feet of mud and then a second destruction layer and want to claim that's the same destruction layer. Stratigraphy doesn't work like that. So I don't think he's really that competent at interpreting stratigraphy. The third problem is there hasn't been any publication reports. There hasn't been any field reports. They've sat on all the raw data. They haven't done interim reports. They haven't done site reports, field reports. No publications except for news requests, popular press, newspaper press releases. The fourth problem. It's in the wrong place. It's in the wrong place. It shouldn't be in the north part of the Dead Sea. It should be in the southern portion of it. And that's because during the War of Kings, those kings are coming from Gaza, cutting across and attacking the common front, and they retreat up into the tar pits. And we know where those tar pits are. They're in Jordan. They're still there today. So it's geographically in the wrong place, because if you place Sodom in the north, you would have to have the Mesopotamian coalition go around the bottom of the Dead Sea, and then go north, and then everyone panic and backtrack south right into the oncoming armies, into the tar pits. You flee away from the enemy, not towards them. The fifth problem is the supposed skyburst. Steve Ortiz examined this stratigraphy, and Collins made a big deal of this. Stratigraphy has been very, very, dark, horrible conflagration, worse than any other site. Well, Steve Ortiz said that, it's not as bad as you even find at Gezer. This is not an extraordinary destruction. Not a destruction that would basically dictate a skyburst. And basically, subject matter experts on site, a skyburst says, no, this is not a skyburst at all. There's no evidence here for a skyburst. And finally, there's problems with the professional practices on the site. This is one of those things. For example, the site lets diggers take home pot shards. This is an illegal practice in Jordan. It's illegal. You're not allowed to take home anything in Jordan. It's like Egypt. You're not allowed to take home pot shards. You're not allowed to take home sand. You're not anything that was a result of human activity is completely illegal to take home, and yet the site allows its diggers to take things home. So, I think this is looking really, really bad. It's looking really, really bad. There's even, for example, in the Nature article, there's pretty good evidence to suggest that some of the data that was used in that article was doctored. It was doctored prior to publication, and they pretty much admit it was photoshopped. So, it's sloppy practices. It's bad archaeology. There's just nothing here that would suggest. That's my phone. Ignore it. So there's nothing here that it would actually suggest that that this is Sodom. It's the evidence here is insufficient, or it's so badly interpreted that they've pretty much excluded it as being the site for Sodom. So anyway, that's my opinion on Tel El Haman. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, Brick Creation gave us a $20 super chat and then retracted the message. Well, I appreciate the super chat. Thank you very much. So I'm very, very grateful for that generous super chat. But I do feel a little bad that you retracted the message. So in the future, if you want to just tag on a question, if that happens again and you want to just tag on a question after that, we'll take it because you paid for it. So again, thank you for your support. We do appreciate it. It helps. I mean, really, this helps us, stay fed. It pays the rent. It pays the electricity. It keeps this channel going. So all your super chats are really, really helpful. So very much appreciate it. Thank you so much. Okay, Brick Creation, another $20 super chat. Again, thank you very much. Last question. If preterism is true, could Daniel 7:22, 26, 27 mean that Christianity took over Rome, supposed fourth kingdom, and ended paganism, spread worldwide, and became world's #1 religion? Just curious. Well, that's a bit of an if-but statement. If it were true, perhaps. Yeah, sure. But then again, you'd have to still show it was true. And that's the issue with preterism. If you assume preterism is true, you can make a lot of stuff fit the way you want it to fit. But then again, at that point, you're doing a kind of confirmation bias. You're basically assuming your own conclusion. So, there's a methodological problem here. There's a methodological problem. Because you can also equally say, well, if preterism isn't true, all the opposite. You'd still be operating under the same confirmation bias, but you'd end up with a different result, with the same sort of philosophical underpinning. So one has to do a little more work there for preterism to assume something. But for grins, let's just take a look at Daniel 7 here. Daniel 7:22. And it says, it's not complete. We'll go to 21 instead. Okay. Verse 21 says, I kept looking, and that horn was waging war with the saints and overpowering them until the Ancient of Days came, and judgment was passed in favor of the saints of the highest one. Let's see if these, get that, the Kodesh, okay, the holy ones of the Most High, and the time arrived when the saints took possession of the kingdom. Okay. Thus he said, the fourth beast will be a fourth kingdom on the earth, which will be different than all the other kingdoms, and it will devour the whole earth and tread it down and crush it. Now, it would be very difficult to try to say that this is Rome. Okay. Part of the problem here is even though some say pre-tribulationalist views will interpret this as Rome, there's a sort of a higher meaning here that the horn here is not just Rome, it's the Antichrist. And in the preterist view, the Antichrist is Nero. Nero's dead when Jerusalem is destroyed. He's dead. He's been dead for 4 years. I think this is a huge problem with preterism. It really is. I mean, I just can't get past the whole preterist idea that the Antichrist is Nero, and he's dead and gone before many of the great persecutions of the church. Now, I know there's preterists who'll say that it's the spirit of Nero that's living on. Yeah, I'm not buying that for a moment. I'm not buying that for a moment because we're told that, in the book of Revelation, that the Antichrist is a man. He's not a ghost. He's not Sauron looking for the One Ring. Okay? He's not a Meyer. Okay? This is not Tolkien. It has to be a living being to be the Antichrist and to wage war against the saints. Okay? And I just do not think preterism fits the bill here. Let's go on to, say, 26 to 27. But the court will sit for judgment, and his dominion will be taken away, annihilated, and destroyed forever. Then the sovereignty, the dominion, and the greatest of all the kingdoms under the whole heaven will be given to the people of the saints of the highest one. His kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom, and all the dominions will serve and obey him. Okay. There would be an issue here. There'd be an issue here. And that would be an everlasting kingdom. If Christianity takes over Rome and becomes sort of the one global power, the everlasting kingdom, well, we're not holding on to it. It's slipping through our fingers pretty fast. So, you could, for example, the amillennialists, will say that, okay, the 1,000-year reign is, say, the kingdom of Christ, the Christian age. Okay, but the preterists have a different problem here. This would be more in tune with, say, an amillennialist point of view, where an amillennialist will say, hey, the kingdom of Christ, this took over from Rome, and that's the 1,000 years of Christ, and it's been extended now for 2,000 years. Okay, so I can sort of see the amillennialist view here, but the preterist view, you would really have to say that Christianity continues to be the dominant world religion practically forever, if this is an interpretation of that. I think that's an issue. Okay, so yeah, I don't see preterism having a lot of legs. It doesn't do anything for me. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I hope that provides some clarity for these verses and basically maybe a different perspective on how to look at them. So anyway, thank you very much for that super chat. It's very generous and I really do appreciate it. Okay, and Corey Coogan for 100. I think it's Romanian. Thank you very much for the super chat. Not to get political, I don't like politics. I heard an argument that Numbers 5, 23, 28 is biblical grounds for abortion because of how God judges an adulterous wife. Is that kind of hermeneutic possible with Old Testament law? Well, let's take a look at Numbers 5, 23 to 28. And I do realize that abortion right now is a very, very hot topic. And I'm not against discussing it, although I do like to be sensitive as I do so. So, and Numbers 5:23 says, the priest shall then write these curses on a scroll, and he shall wash them off into the water of bitterness. He shall make the woman drink the water of bitterness that brings a curse, so that the water which brings a curse will go into her and cause bitterness. And the priest shall take the grain offering of jealousy from a woman's hand, and he shall wave the grain offering before the Lord and bring it to the altar. And the priest shall take a handful of grain offering as its memorial offering and offer it up on smoke on the altar. Afterwards he shall make the woman drink the water. And the next two. When he has made her drink the water, then it shall come about, if she has defiled herself and has been unfaithful to her husband, that the water shall bring a curse, shall go into her and cause bitterness, and her abdomen will swell and her thigh will waste away, and the woman will become a curse among her people. But if the woman has not defiled herself and is clean, then she will be free and conceive children. Okay. Essentially, what's being described here is actually a sign of barrenness, not a grounds for abortion. Okay. And this is a test of jealousy of faithfulness. And there's some here invoking of, say, that God will intervene here with that. Okay. Is it essentially what's happening here is the matter of a husband and being jealous with his wife is being taken to the priest, and she's not being given an abortifactive. Okay, that's not what's going on here. But she is being given something as part of the ceremony of denying it in the presence of God. And the expectation here is not that she will abort. Okay, that's not what's going on here, but that she'll bloat. She'll bloat and she'll waste away. This is more of a sign of actual, how do I put this? Tumors of the reproductive system, of a woman's reproductive system. That's what's happening. That's the symptoms being shown here. Is tumors like uterine tumors, ovarian tumors. That's what's being shown here. Is cancer. She's going to get cancer. Okay? Because she's defiled herself. Now, we do know that there are some sexually transmitted diseases that do cause cancer. Human papillomavirus is one of them. Okay? And I'm not giving out medical information here. I'm not a medical doctor. Okay? But we do know that there are certain sexually transmitted diseases that do cause cancer. And what's being shown here with the bloating of the abdomen and the wasting away of the thighs is a sign of cancer. So it's not a grounds for abortion, but it is calling on judgment on, say, a guilty spouse. Okay? So that's what's happening here. And I don't think this is not an attempt to abort a child, essentially. And I don't think you can read that in this particular hermeneutic, or use that hermeneutic in this particular case. It doesn't fit the context of the passage. Okay. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I hope that explains the passage. Very much appreciated. Okay, Cataphract 3 for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Mr. Conjecture Time. Could be. Moses clearly took a hallucinogenic drug when he saw the burning bush. Maybe inhaled it from the bush. Could be. Well, there is a field called Archeopharmacology. Okay? And there are people out there that do study this. It's a very specialized field. It requires a lot of biochemistry. It requires a lot of botany. It's more science than it is actually archaeology. But there are things here that that people have noticed in some of the plant preparations in the Pentateuch that are possibly hallucinogenic. Okay, it's not so far-fetched as one might think. Now, I think we can rule out certain plants. Like, for example, I don't think cannabis was... There was an article recently stating that cannabis was used in the incense. There's no evidence of that at all. No evidence of that whatsoever. But there are other herbs in ancient Israel that do have a mildly hallucinogenic effect. I don't know what those are off the top of my head, but I remember reading an article about them once upon a time. So, yeah, and they're very obscure. So, it is one of those things where it's a possibility. But how hallucinogenic is also a matter of considerable debate. So, people have suggested it. There are some plants that are like this, but it's also doubtful too that Moses was high at the burning bush. Okay, I don't think that's a realistic possibility. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very interesting question. Okay, brick creation for $5. Wait, hold it. Is that? I think I got the wrong question there. Properties. There we go. All right. Camel Leopard for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. Shabbat Shalom, Dr. Falk. Well, Shabbat Shalom to you too. Does Genesis 1 imply angelic beings are made in the image of God? Does it also suggest that they had a hand in the creation of man? Okay. I'm going to give you the quick answer to both, and then I'll tease this out. The quick answer to both is no and no. Okay. Now, they're not made in the image of God. Okay. Part of the reason is because in the case of man is specifically made in the image of God because he's made in a fleshly body to hold the image of God. Part of the fact that we are images of God is the fact that we are created in such a way that we have that capacity to be that reflection of God. Now, what exactly is the image of God is something that is highly, highly debated in theology. I'm not going to attempt to try to tease this out. There's been various proposals like intelligence, creativity, will, that sort of thing. I don't think it's any of those. I don't think the image of God is based upon one's abilities. Yep. I think it's based upon one's reflection. It's based upon one's reflection that God sees himself in the creation of mankind. So in many respects, I think that the image of God is objective, not subjective. So it's not the abilities that define you as an imager of God. It's how God sees you that reflects that image. Like God looking in a mirror. God looks at us and sees himself. When God looks at the angels, he does not see himself. In many ways, the image of God is, or the angelic beings are a lot more animal-like, lot more, they're higher than animals, but they're lower than God. But they have those very, very animalistic traits. They are spiritual beings, but they don't have that reflection. So I don't think they're made in the image of God. But at the same time, too, Genesis 1 does seem to imply that at least some angelic beings were made during the 6 days of creation. Particularly where Genesis 1, the 4th day, where it says he made the sun, the moon, and stars, and all the heavenly host. The heavenly host is actually at the end of the chapter, but he mentions the heavenly host as being part of the creation, the 6 days of creation. So at least some angelic beings were created during the 6 days. Okay. Now, your second question here, does this also suggest that they had a hand in the creation of man? Not necessarily. Again, we're told that mankind is a creation of God. God's creating, and classical Christian theology says let us make man in our image and our likeness is a sign of Trinity, not angelic beings. Okay. So, I don't think that they were part of the creation of man. I could always be wrong, but I don't think the evidence supports it. I think there's an alternate reading that's more consistent with the rest of Scripture. So anyway, that's where I think we sort of land on this. So at least I land on this. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Okay, Camel up again for $5. Thank you very much. The best way to translate Elohim as it was used in the Nakash's statement to Hava Eve, for those who don't know. You will be like God, you will be like the gods. I think the best way to translate this is in what's called there's two ways to interpret Elohim. In the simple plural, meaning gods, or the magnificent plural, meaning God. Okay? And they look identical in form. What determines this is context. And sometimes pronouns will help you figure it out too. But the be like God, the context seems to suggest it's like God, not like gods. Okay? If it was gods, we should see a definite article in front of that. So, like, the gods, Ha Elohim. Okay? So, or in this case, K Elohim. Okay, so we should see a definite article there if it's like gods, and I don't think we see that there. I'll just take a brief check just to make sure. Let's see here. It's Genesis 2. Or 3. Genesis 3, okay. Genesis 3, 1. Verse 5. Up in the Hebrew. For in that day that you eat of it. Yeah, it's just a simple simple particle preposition key. So there's no definite article here. So we would expect it if it's like the gods. We would like gods. We would expect a definite article here. It would be just much more natural reading. So I think like God is the most probable reading here. But there's also something very interesting here that often does get overlooked, and I think this is exceptionally interesting. Where it says, in the previous verse, you shall not surely die. One of the things that's overlooked, often overlooked here, is that the you is in the masculine plural. That's very interesting, because it's not in the feminine singular. It's not the feminine singular you. It's masculine plural you. It infers that Adam was there alongside Eve. So that's really very, very interesting. Okay, so this is incredibly interesting. I think this is just one of those little details that's really easy to miss. But that you will be like gods. You know, there's the implication here that, you know, Adam's not that far away. He's listening, and he's throwing Eve under the bus. He's making her the canary, sending the canary first. So that's what I think is going on here. I think it's like God, and I think the you is referring to both Adam and Eve. So, N.A., thank you very much for that super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, again, the Camel Leopard for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Was the rock which Yeshua is referring to in Matthew 16:18 is it Kepha himself, or the truth that Messiah is Ha-Mashiach? Okay, let's bring that up. I'll bring that up here. Now, this is the verse where I basically make every Roman Catholic mad at me, and I apologize in advance for this, because I have a very, very strong opinion on this one. Okay. All right. Basically, Jesus is using a kind of pun here. He's using a kind of pun. Now, this verse is the classic verse for Petrine succession. The idea that the popes, as the descendant of Peter, are basically the foundation of the church, and everyone owes their allegiance to the papacy. Okay? But there's also an exegetical issue with that particular reading. And the verse says, and I will say to you that you are Peter. Okay? Basically, the Peter, the rock. Okay? Or, sorry, a rock. A rock. It's not the definite article. You are Peter. And upon this rock, I will build my church. Now, the interesting thing is, Peter's Petros. But the rock here, upon this rock, is feminine. This rock is in the feminine dative form. This is not Peter. Peter's obviously not feminine. Okay? Upon this rock's in the feminine. It's talking about a cornerstone. Basically the prophesied cornerstone that was cast off. That God will build his temple using the discarded cornerstone. The discarded cornerstone being the line of David that was discarded. And Jesus is the rock. He's the cornerstone upon which all other rocks are used to build his church. We even see an allusion to this in, say, the book of Revelations, where it talks about all the stones that were used to build the city of God. Well, that is an allusion to the saints, to the church, to this analogical structure. So that's what we have here is essentially that the whole idea here is that the rock is not Peter, but he is a rock. He's one of them. The other rock, the Petra, the Te Petra, is not the same as Peter. It's a different rock, and it is the rock of the cornerstone. So, I think when you try to read this as being, yes, I know there's I see you, Catholic convert. Can't disagree with more of your analysis. You're free to disagree with me. But you are going to have to reconcile the fact that this rock is feminine. Feminine. That's going to be a problem. Because Petra is definitely feminine, and Peter wasn't feminine. But if it is talking about a cornerstone, cornerstones are feminine. So, take that for what it's worth, okay? Yes, I know this has landed me in trouble with all my Catholic viewers here, but I gotta tell it to you straight up. Now, you might have other arguments for the papacy. Fair enough, okay? But it's very difficult to justify it using this verse. And it's just going to be really, 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 it's hard to get past. It's really hard to get past. So, and I really haven't heard a good apologetic for getting past that, honestly. So anyway, again, if this was talking about Peter, it would again repeat the Petros. You know, it would repeat the rock. But it doesn't. So anyway, that's my particular view on this, and that's how I read the text. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay. Question from my Bible study. What is the context of Havah's Eve's statement about Seth in Genesis 4:25, if he is a descendant of Adam? Okay, I'm going to pull that up. Okay, and Adam had relations with the wives again, and she gave birth to a son, and named him Seth, for she said, God has appointed me another offspring in place of Abel, for Cain killed him. Okay. There's a couple of things that could be going on here. Now, we could have it is possible that we have another clan succession here. It's also possible that we have, given the time frames involved, that there might have been more than one Seth. There might have been a Seth that was born directly to Adam and Eve, who then had a child himself, and then had a grandson named Seth. We do find that in Hebrew naming, where names sort of change off between father and son. So, grandson will usually have the same name, often have the same name as the grandfather. So that's not uncommon in Hebrew. And the fact is, too, this could be a condensation of the text, an abridgment of the text for the sake of the narrative. The fact is that having a grandson named Seth would be still considered to be a son, a replacement son. For Eve, even if that was not a direct mother to son birth, even if it's something like a grandmother to grandson lineage, that would still can be considered to be a blood relation, and she would still be totally justified in saying the statement. We do find this frequently in Hebrew texts, where there's no distinction made between a son and a grandson, or even a great-great-grandson. All your descendants are coming from that single father. So, you know, just like for example, your grandfather is your father. He's like 2 generations removed, but he's still your father. Your grandfather is also your grandfather, just like And just in the same way, your grandson is also your son. Your great-grandsons are also your sons. So Eve saying this is a replacement, yeah, it might not be, there might not be a direct connection between, say, in the respect of its mother-son relation, but she could still claim it. And it could be just being a bridge just to make the narrative tighter. Easier to remember, easier to recall. So, other than that, it's really difficult to tell. We just don't have enough data to be sure exactly how to read that. So, just for the sake of simplicity, just take the text at face value, essentially. And if you have to, deal with the descendants, the context of that statement is essentially that she's lost one son because Cain killed Abel. Over the argument over whose sacrifice is better. That's the context of the statement. Is Cain kills Abel, and Abel. There's not a replacement in the clan. And we have to remember, too, the Israelites are viewing this through the whole focus of clans. You lose a member of the clan, a male member of the clan, now a piece of the clan's missing. The survival of the whole human species is now at jeopardy because there's a hole in the clan. Seth is the replacement for Abel. He brings back completeness of the clan. And that's how the Israelites are going to view this. That's how the original readership would have viewed this. So that's the sort of the cultural context that would have gone into this passage. It doesn't actually matter if Seth is a son, a grandson, a great-grandson. It doesn't matter. The replacement is what matters. That's what matters here. That's what's important in the text. That's what it's important to the reader. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Okay. Now we get to go to Twidget. And it looks like we're going to have to restart this, but I don't want to lose the beginning super chats either. So what we're going to do is I'm going to have to take some and then restart it when it starts bombing out on me. Mr. Rich B.O.B. for $2. Thank you very much for the super chat. And he asks, if you were to start a ska band, what'd you call it? Oh boy. I don't actually like ska. I really, really tried to get into ska. A lot of my friends really liked ska. I just couldn't get into it. I mean, I have a huge, broad range of music I love. I have very eclectic taste in music. But ska is just not one of them. So, I would never start a ska band. I just could not get into it aesthetically. Just could not get into it. So, yeah, I'd have to decline that one. But thank you very much for the super chat. I do very much appreciate it. Let's see here, next one. Andrew Goulet for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. What is your opinion of Bart Ehrman's scholarship? Is he acting in good faith with strong scholarly skill, or is he promoting weak arguments for rhetorical purposes? He's doing both. Okay, he's doing both. Bart Ehrman's scholarship can actually be quite good. It can be really, really good. Okay? But he also tends to promote arguments that, let's say, even weak apologists can kind of answer. They're not that sophisticated arguments. Like, for example, I heard him use the argument, well, there's a contradiction in the Bible. And, Judas, in one gospel hung himself, and another he fell down a cliff and split open. Well, that had been resolved many, many years ago. And the reconstruction is that, Judas tried to hung himself, botched it, and fell down the cliff. Okay? So, this whole idea of, you see in Bart Ehrman's background his fundamentalism coming out. He's an ex-fundamentalist. He went to Moody Bible College. He did his bachelor's degree at Moody Bible Institute. Yeah. He's a Moodyite. Yeah, he did his bachelor's degree at Moody Bible Institute, which is pretty fundamentalist when it gets right down to it. He is basically repeating the arguments that convinced him to walk out of fundamentalism. But he also doesn't do a lot of nuance either when he approaches these arguments. So he does still have that mindset of it's either all, how do I say this, the fundamentalist reading, or it's a contradiction. There's no middle ground there for him. There's no alternate reading. Okay? So, I don't think it's so much for rhetorical purposes. I think this is what he really believes. I think he's genuine about that. But it's also sort of gives you an insight, a look into what his past was too. Now, when he does do his scholarship, like his text critical work, quite good. His text critical work's good. I don't have any problems with his text critical work. I actually like some of his work. I think when he does do proper scholarship, I think it's quite good. But his past haunts him. So I think a lot of his, say, arguments for atheism are vacuous. I think they're not good arguments. Never were good arguments. But they are the arguments that do convince people to walk out of the faith. Now, I want to add one other thing about, the whole sort of his background, because he's not unique in this. He's not unique in being from Moody and walking away from the faith. I knew when I went to seminary, I had a friend who worked at Moody Bible Institute as an exit counselor. Now, what's an exit counselor? An exit counselor is basically somebody the parents send after those who walk away from the faith after attending Bible college. Okay? So, let's say you send your kid to Bible college, he comes home from Bible college, and a year later he decides to renounce the faith. Parents call up school calls up the exit counselor visits the kid and finds out what's going on. Okay? Now, not all seminaries have exit counselors. Okay, but Moody did. And I was good friends with him. I actually had classes with him. But I asked him one time. Well, because he asked me, why are people leaving the faith so hand on a fist? And I said, look, you've created a climate here where people are going to resent things. They're going to resent the faith. You're going to have some attrition. And people aren't going to decide whether or not that they really want to commit to this until, they hit their, 20s. But I asked him in response, well, okay, how big a problem is this? How big a problem is this at Moody? And he says to me, about 40%. It's about 40% of the graduates. And that was kind of scary. That really bothered me when I heard that. That 40% of graduates from Moody end up leaving the faith. Like, what? You know, these are supposed to be confirmed Christians. These are supposed to be the next leaders of, albeit fundamentalism, but still inside the faith. So, that disturbed me. It really disturbed me, and Bart Ehrman is just one of those statistics. He's just one of those statistics. So I think we have a real problem here, real systemic problem within more rigid views of Christianity, that it's leading people away from the faith instead of to Jesus. So, this is why I'm sometimes a little harsh on, say, fundamentalism. Is not so much because of what they believe, but it's what how they're teaching people to think. It's the hermeneutic I have a problem with, not what they believe. I mean, frankly, most of the beliefs of fundamentalists I have no problem with. Heck, I hold many of them myself. Okay? But that creating that hermeneutic where it's either this is the interpretation, you read it wouldn't literally, or it's contradictory. That's not helping anyone. It's not helping anyone. And we should be teaching our young people to think biblically. And part of thinking biblically is being able to see that there's other possible interpretations to biblical passages. There's another atheist. I can't remember what's his name now at the moment. The one I had did the first popcorn review. Do you remember his name? Josh Bowman. He said to me once, he was a fundamentalist, and he calls himself an Acts 7 dispensationalist, and he says, you can't get more fundy than that. But he told me once, when I had a talk, I had a phone call with him once, and he said to me that he'd already left the Christian faith, and it was at Johns Hopkins doing his PhD. When a friend of his told him, well, don't you know there's another way you can read these passages? He had not considered that there was any other way to read the Bible other than what he was taught. Here's a guy that wasn't taught to think. He was taught what to think, but not how to think. And I think that is a real problem. And we need to start teaching people how to think, not what to think. Which is why I'm not dogmatic. I mean, this is one of the reasons why I don't get into denominational stuff. Yeah, we touched on it tonight when we took the Matthew 16 question, the Peter thing. Okay, we touched on that. Okay, and some of that's going to be unavoidable. Okay. However, I don't get into denominational specifics generally. I just stay away from that because I don't think that's so important. I really don't care if people are Eastern Orthodox, Roman Catholic, Anglican, Lutheran, Calvinist, Arminian, Molinist, Coptic. None of that matters to me. Fundamentalist, evangelical free, Nazarene, doesn't matter to me. I don't care. I want people to learn how to think, though, within their denominational setting. Whatever that denominational setting. This is why we do the popcorn videos. We do the popcorn videos to teach people how to think, and how to think in accordance with what is biblical, and how to use what's biblical in proper thinking and logical discourse. So, which is why, last week we had a question on Calvinism. Okay, it's one of those things where I say, hey, it's within the pale of Christian orthodoxy. But I'll say the same thing about Arminianism and Molinism too. They're all within the pale of Christian orthodoxy. Young Earth creationism, I think it's got a problem. But I think all forms of compatibilist theories of origins have problems. But they're all within the pale of orthodoxy. So, all of these are acceptable views within Christianity. I might not share those views. I mean, I can't. I mean, here's one of the crazy things about, say, when you start applying for jobs at seminaries, is all of them want you to believe their doctrinal statement. Well, every doctrinal statement at every Bible college is different. You would have to be earnestly and passionately believe in Calvinism and Arminianism and Molinism, premillennialist, postmillennialist, amillennialist, preterism, semi-preterism. You would have to be a supersessionist and a Israelite futurist. It's just and you'd end up being stark, raving, mad schizophrenic. Because they're asking you to be all these things simultaneously, and only a psychopath can switch their beliefs on the fly. So I think it is much, much more important that we teach people how to think. Essentially, in what ways do you think, rather than what you believe. And if we just did that, the church would be a lot healthier and have a lot more discernment and be a lot more wise. So anyway, thank you very much for that super chat. Very much appreciated. I know I kind of went off on a tangent here, but I think there was some important stuff here. So thank you very much, and I do appreciate it. Okay. Another one from Andrew Goulet. Thank you again for that super chat for $10. When Pharaoh Necho II tells King Josiah that God told him to fight against the Babylonians, 2 Chronicles 35:20-21, do you think God really spoke with him, or is there some confusion in the text? Okay. Now, not necessarily. There's not necessarily some confusion in the text. We do see this in Egyptian documents, where it uses God in a generic manner. And they might be referring to, say, a specific god in the Egyptian pantheon, like for example Amun-Re. But the Egyptians are just as comfortable using the qualitative here. So they might get a message from Amun-Re, and Necho might thought it was from Amun-Re, and he still might say, God spoke to me. That's perfectly within say, Egyptian way of thinking. Okay? So, now, do I think God really spoke with him? Or we have, this is his testimony. This is Necho II's testimony. And God said to him, go and fight against the Babylonians. Go help your allies, the Assyrians. I don't think there's a confusion in the text. I think Necho II really thought he got a message from what he thought was God. Whether that's Amun-Re, who he thinks it came from, whether it's Yahweh Elohim, we don't know. We don't know what Necho II thought that God was. Might have got a message from Montu, the Egyptian god of war. would be very likely if he's being called to go and fight the Assyrians. But I don't think the confusion here in the text is more our reading of it. Now, we do know that this does have an incredible impact upon the end of the kingdom of Judah, basically the Judahite kingdom. For example, Necho II goes up to Carchemish, and he gets his butt kicked. The combined forces of the Persians and the Babylonians really kick the butts of the Assyrians and the Egyptian coalition. Pharaoh Necho II is lucky enough to escape with his army, but the army of the Assyrian Emperor Ashurbanipal II is completely destroyed. It's completely destroyed. They get completely wiped out. And basically what happens is Necho comes back and he rains retribution. I mean, Josiah's dead as a result of that conflict. The new person on the throne is basically deposed, and a new puppet is placed on the throne. This leads to the end of the Judahite kingdom within a very short period of time. So, is it possible that God really spoke to him? Yeah, it's possible. Is it possible that this was an oracle from one of the Egyptian gods? Possible too. We don't have enough information. So, anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. But that, unfortunately, is all we have. And sometimes the Bible does give us ambiguous readings to infer things, hint at them that there might be more going on here. So we should add that too. This might be one of those ambiguous texts that's supposed to say, well, maybe it's a bit of both. Maybe it's a bit of both. Okay. Angel VWM for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. Hi, Dr. Falk. Happy Friday the 13th. Well, happy Friday the 13th to you. Do you think Cain, Abel, and Seth were direct sons of Adam and Eve, or later clan progenitors from Adam and Eve's genetic line? I think Cain and Abel were direct descendants, but I think Seth was later down the line. I think he's a later progenitor. Okay, that's my opinion on that. I think Seth's father is unnamed in the text. He could also have the name Seth. That's also a possibility. We mentioned that earlier. So that's a possibility too. But my personal opinion is that Seth is a later progenitor. Cain and Abel are basically progenitors, but they come, say, directly as sons of Adam and Eve. At least recent enough that I think it's plausible that they're early progenitors, whereas, say, Seth is a much later progenitor. Okay, so that's my opinion on that. No, everyone won't agree with that, but that's what I've determined from the text. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Okay, Lord Hideri for $5 Canadian. Thank you very much. Good to see you here. In Genesis 41 to 42, how common was it for visitors of Egypt to receive these articles of clothing? Okay, I'm going to bring that one up because I know what you're talking about, but it's easier if I bring this up. 41. If I'm not mistaken, this is about the chain of gold. Okay. And I will bring this up and we will read it. Okay. Genesis 41 to 42. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, "See, I have set you over all the land of Egypt." And Pharaoh took off his signet ring from his hand and put it on Joseph's hand. and clothed him in garments of fine linen, and put gold necklace around his neck. Okay. Now, how common were these? There are 3 items here. The signet ring, the garments of fine linen, and the gold necklace. Let's talk about the linen first. These are usually clean linens. They're fine linens. They're almost transparent. The garment of the vizier is different. It's very different than other people's garments. There's actually a special garment for the vizier. So Joseph receiving a new garment, a new linen garment, would be very appropriate. It's a strange-looking garment, honestly. It's basically almost like a dress that's cinched under the armpits. So it goes under the armpits and flows down in a robe. And this is the article of clothing that you find for viziers. It's the symbol of office. You'll find an example of this, for example, in the tomb of Rekhmare, Theban tomb 100, where Rekhmare is a vizier, and you see him in the linen garment of the vizier. It's very unique. So I think that's what's being referred to here as the garments of fine linen. He's being given the vizier's robes. The signet ring. We do have several officials in ancient Egypt that were called the seal bearers. Basically, the guy who held the ring of the king. And that guy could sign documents on behalf of the king. The ring was more than just, say, a symbol of office. It was essentially that you had the king's trust to sign documents on his behalf. So you'll often find texts in ancient Egypt that talk about being the king's sole companion and seal bearer. That idea of being the sole companion is the idea that you have the king's complete trust. And that not only do you have the king's trust, you've got signing authority because you got trust. So being the seal bearer was a big deal. Big deal. Now, finally, the gold necklace. This one's really neat. This one is really neat. It was a gold necklace that we actually see on... viziers didn't only have the gold necklace. We see it on some scribes. We see it on some generals. Like Horemheb receives the chain of gold. There's some viziers that have it, of course. It's the Egyptian equivalent of the Congressional Medal of Honor. It's the Egyptian equivalent of the Congressional Medal of Honor. This is a huge deal. Okay? You will see tomb paintings all over the place, where somebody had received the chain of gold. Like Horemheb, in his tomb relief from his I think it's his Amarna tomb. He's being given the chain of gold by Akhenaten himself. So this is a big deal. As I said, it's the equivalent of the Congressional Medal of Honor or the President's Award of Honor, or if you're Canadian, the Order of Canada. It's on that level. So, not every vizier received the chain of gold. Most viziers would have received the garment, and they would also be often be the seal bearer as well. Not all of them got the chain of gold. You had to do something special to get the chain of gold, but it was awarded, and was awarded to people that weren't necessarily viziers. So as I said, some scribes got it too, but that's because they did something really, really spectacularly special. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very interesting question. Very interesting question. Okay, Andrew Goulet again for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. One of my hobbies is reading martial arts history. Ooh, that's a fascinating subject. I read that boxing goes all the way back to the 3rd millennium in Sumer. How much evidence of boxing have you seen throughout ancient history? Very little for boxing, but martial arts, I see that in Egypt going at least to the back to Dynasty 5 of the Old Kingdom. Okay, so that is mid 3rd millennium in Egypt. Okay, so martial arts, interestingly enough, gets its height in the Middle Kingdom in Egypt. And one of the interesting things is at the tombs of Beni Hassan, you see these wrestling catalogs painted on the wall. And they're catalogs. They're not just random wrestling moves. Each wrestling move is unique. And there's like 200 to 300 of them on each wall. So there's definitely a systematic... There's evidence of a systematic martial art that's being trained here. So, definitely the case. Now, interestingly enough, when we look at, say, for example, Abraham and his trained men, the Hanakim, there have been a lot of critical scholars that have basically said there's no evidence that Abraham's men would have been trained. However, Abraham is contemporary with Middle Kingdom Egypt. And he had been to Egypt. It's it's not that hard to conceive that one of the slaves that Abraham picked up in Egypt was trained in the Egyptian martial arts style. So, there's definitely evidence for this. And it's really conceivable that Abraham's trained men were actually trained in these combat styles. You should tell us lecture and having visuals. I did give a lecture on this at ETS, and we had no slide projector because they wouldn't pay for it. So here I am trying to show this. And I have like 20 slides of these martial arts positions and poses and all this, and I'm having to basically, say, well, if you could see this, you'd have to imagine that this is happening. So it's very difficult to explain it without visuals. But it's definitely there. We do see it. Well, I did call somebody out in the audience, and I did have to demo a couple of these positions without actually throwing the guy to the ground. Okay, that wouldn't have gone over in the theological conference to actually throw somebody to the ground, but I did demo a few of these to actually show what the moves were like. But we do have a lot of evidence for this in Egypt, so and it is very, very interesting. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated and very interesting question. Okay. White girl posts Instagram black screen for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat, and it's good to see you here tonight. Dr. Falk, since you believe Yahweh came from Edom, what do you think of the view that Yahweh was an Edomite god, Qos, whose followers were also monolatrous and iconic, slaying idols they came across? It's hard to say, honestly. We don't have a lot written from Edom, honestly. Our records from Edom are, well, scarce. We got almost nothing from Edom. So, it's going to be one of those things that I think we need more evidence. I'm not sure if I have some reservations whether Yahweh is Qos, but possible. It's possible that they were also following a form of Yahweh as well. I do think it's based upon the biblical text. I do think that Moses did bring back a Yahweh with him, and as a result of his interaction with the Midianites. And the Midianites were spread out from Saudi Arabia into Edom and down into the Sinai. So the Edomite kingdom actually almost starts after the, almost contemporaneous with the Exodus itself. So there's a little overlap there between the Edomite kingdom and, say, the Midianites, but but at the same time too, it's hard to know exactly what's going on there because we don't have enough records. We just don't have enough evidence. So until then, we've kind of got to be satisfied to go, well, this is a possibility, but we're not sure. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Cole Walker for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Glad you seem to be feeling better. I still have a little bit of nagging cough. You might be hearing it. I do hope we see the return of the Terminator glasses at some point, though. Yeah, my coworkers have been saying I should come back with the Terminator glasses. They said it really startled them, but they got used to it real fast and they liked it. I'm not sure what to make of that, honestly, but it's not a look I'm terribly comfortable with. So I'm not the type that normally wears sunglasses. So it was an extraordinary reason why I was wearing them. So I am feeling a bit better. As I say, still got the nagging cough. At least the pain in my eyes are gone now. So that's a good thing. But anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I very much appreciate it. And I'm thankful for the good wishes as well. Okay, Andrew Goulet again for $10. Thank you very much. How many pharaohs do we know of who ordered the genocidal murder of babies from some ethnic group? None. The only evidence that pharaohs order genocidal murder of babies is actually from the Book of Exodus itself. Okay, this was not normal. Pharaohs did not normally order this, even amongst Semitic populations. It just wasn't a normal occurrence. There's also, for example, though, in Exodus, chapter 1, we really also get the context of that as well, which is that they were in a state of war. The Egyptians were fearing that they would be invaded, and the invaders would side with the Israelites. And in the Egyptian worldview, that means, they're viewing the people at Avaris as what they would call Amu, or Asiatics. So it's clear that they are fearing an invasion from the Levant. Well, there's only one power that was ever able to really pull that off, and that was the Hittites. And we know that that war between the Hittites and the Egyptians was pretty much limited from the reigns of King Ai to Ramses II. So there isn't a whole lot of candidates in there that could have been responsible for the murder of babies. It would essentially be Ai, Horemheb, Ramses I, Seti I, and Ramses II. Those are the only candidates. Really, the most likely candidate in that list is probably Horemheb. Okay, Horemheb or Ai. Those are your two most likely candidates here. Both were ruthless. Both were basically ends justifies the means. Incredibly ruthless men, both of them. Both of them could have easily been responsible. And both of them didn't really much care about, say, the divine consequences of doing such a thing. So, the fact is that none of this would ever be recorded. I mean, first of all, it's unlikely that they would record this on a temple, and most of our records are from temples. So we don't know of any king that would have actually done this, because this is not something that you would have written on a temple. You know, it's just and as I said, most of our records from Egypt are religious records. They're not historical per se. So I don't think we have a lot there as far as say extra biblical evidence for that. So anyway, sometimes the evidence is just not there yet, one way or the other. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Catholic Convert for $4.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. How can I get literature PhD with only 3.2 GPA in my undergrad in communications? And 28. I am a great writer, though. How do I get funded? Okay. Okay. 3.2 is not a great GPA. But it's not horrible either. Okay, it's a solid B. It's a solid B. So, it's not, there's ways to get a PhD. Okay? It does take work. And 28 is not that old. Okay? When I went back to grad school, my BA was a second class. Okay, essentially C+. 2.8. Okay, that was my GPA in my undergrad, 2.8. Okay, so I didn't have great grades in my undergrad. Okay? And I was 35. Okay? So you're actually further ahead than I was. But the way I did it was I got one master's degree, and then another master's degree, and then another master's degree, and then I got my PhD. The fact is, if you do really, really well in grad school, and it's a lot easier to get in a master's degree than it is to get a PhD. If you're going to go into grad school, that's going to be the real test. Get into a grad school. If you want to do a literature PhD, do an MA in literature. Do really, really well. Do exceptionally well in your master's program. My master's degrees were all very, very high. I have magna cum laude on 2 of my master's degrees. So, do exceptionally well in your master's program. If you do exceptionally well in your master's program, that's a bigger indication of how you will do in a PhD program to basically a selection committee than, say, doing very well in a bachelor's degree and bombing out on a master's. So, if you do need to rehabilitate a GPA, the best way to do it is do a master's program. It also will tell you if it's really if you're really cut out for it too. Honestly, because a lot of people who will go into a PhD program direct from a bachelor's degree aren't that cut out for it, and the number of people who bomb out going directly from a bachelor's to a PhD is a lot higher than people who do the intermediary step of doing the master's degree first. So I would, in your case particularly, do a master's degree, do an MA. And if you do well, then PhD may be for you. If you don't do well at the master's degree, well, you might have your answer there. But there's always second chances in academia. There's always second chances. And getting a PhD is more about hard work than intelligence. Work hard. And if you go get in the master's degree, don't mess it up. It's the only piece of advice I can get you. So if you can get in there and you work real hard and you show yourself as really, really good at the master's program, much more likely to accept you in a PhD program. All right? So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it, and I appreciate the question too. Linguist Ammo for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Hey, Dr. Falk, just for the title of the stream, the Manna Machine. Yes, the Manna Machine. Over Area 51. Because that's where all the Manna Machines go and congregate, is Area 51. Absolutely. You know, UFOs, nah, they're not flying saucers. No, they're Manna Machines, obviously. And they make popcorn. Even better. You wouldn't actually want manna from a Manna Machine. Flip the popcorn switch, you know, make it do the good stuff. Anyway, it's good to see you tonight, friend. Glad you could make it. I just saw that 51. It was like, okay, Area 51 Manna Machine. Could not resist. Even if I had known it was going to be Friday the 13th, I still would have done Manna Machines over Area 51. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, I have to just restart my Twidget here because it stopped working for me. So hopefully we will not lose any super chats in all this. And we might have lost some super chats. So I got to go back here and I just got to make sure I did not lose any. So, yes, we did. We just lost one, it looks like. So, take this one very quickly here. So I do not want to lose any of them. No super chat left behind. Okay. So just take a moment here. Okay. And okay, and we have a second super chat here from Catholic Convert. So this was the one that Twidget decided not to load, so we got that back. All right, and thank you very much for the super chat. And he asks, could there be other advanced agricultural civilizations similar to Egyptian but older, which we haven't found yet? Say 20,000 years old. Okay. Yes, it's possible. Maybe not quite that old. We got that back. All right. And thank you very much for the super chat. Yes. Could there be other advanced? Okay, a little bit of technical difficulty. For example, in Turkey, like the site of Göbekli Tepe, it's about 10,000, 12,000 years old. And there is evidence of some agricultural products being used there. Like cultivated seeds, what's it, barley, etc. So there is some evidence that we have agricultural civilizations, at least in, say, Asia Minor, going back 8 to 12 years, or 8 to 12,000 years. So, you know, that we have. Older than 20,000, it starts getting real sketchy real fast. We don't have strong evidence of that. There have been some people who've suggested Mesopotamia might have older, but the problem is the current thinking, the current, say, consensus is that that the agricultural grains like barley, emmer, chickpeas, lentils were domesticated in Asia Minor. And there does seem to be some pretty good genetic evidence for this. Most of that is going to take place around 8 to 12,000 years ago, as I said. So we do get, we also get an idea, for example, radioisotope measuring. The one thing about radioisotopes on skeletons is you can actually tell what the diet was. This has been very, very useful. For example, when skeletons are exhumed and the radioisotopes are done, you can tell if the person's primary diet was, say, cultivated grains versus, say, meat, wild game, even wild plants. And we start seeing, as I say, around 10,000, 10,000 years ago, we start seeing skeletons that sort of demonstrate the radioisotope profile for domesticated grains, and we find this in Turkey. Now, that we could always find a newer civilization, or we could find new finds that present maybe older civilizations than that. Like, for example, as I said, Göbekli Tepe was a complete surprise. No one was expecting to find a huge temple complex that old there. So, you do get surprises in archaeology. So, definitely possibility we could find something even older. But right now, the evidence is leaning towards that the earliest agricultural civilizations are roughly 12,000 years ago. So, anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, and our next super chat is from Fencing Mitch for $5 Australian. Thank you very much for the super chat. Hi, Doc. Glad to see the Falconator is gone. Just so happens I got it this week. Oh, I'm so sorry. Got me thinking, how was waste management worked in the Bronze Age? Garbage pits. Yep, garbage pits. They basically dig these pits and throw all their garbage in it. Some of these garbage pits are actually quite large, but in some ways they're our best source of archaeological data. Some years ago, there was a big brouhaha over a course at a major university teaching on the history of garbage. Well, archaeology is nothing but going through people's garbage. It's not an unreasonable thing to study, which is the history of garbage. You look at some of the greatest advances in biblical studies and Egyptology have come from a garbage pit. Like, for example, all those beautiful ostraca we find at Deir el-Medina were in a garbage pit. 1,400 ostraca that told us more about the economic life of Egypt than rest of the papyri and ostraca combined. It was just incredible the amount of information we got out of that garbage pit. The papyri from Oxyrhynchus, 2 million papyri, from basically the Greek, the Hellenistic era. That discovery was in a garbage pit, but it also was, it also revolutionized our understanding of biblical Greek. Prior to Oxyrhynchus, it was thought that Greek was almost a magical language, because there wasn't any more other examples of it found in history. Well, now we have a huge number of examples of Koine Greek, but all of them come from this garbage pit. So, yeah, waste management was a thing. People did do it. And garbage pits were a primary means of doing it. So, yeah, waste management was a thing, even back then. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. The whole subject of garbage is fascinating, because this is what archaeologists do, is essentially try to interpret how life was from what people discarded. So, very interesting. Very, very interesting. I could wax eloquent about ancient garbage. Thanks again for the super chat. Okay. Kwame Adu 007 for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat, and it's good to see you here tonight. Hi, Dr. Falk. Do you think the prohibitions against incest in Leviticus 18 is partially tied to Ramses II's engaging so deeply in the practice? No, I don't. He didn't engage all that deeply in it. Now, there is one of the royal wives of Ramses II was one of his daughters. Okay, but we have to also be a little cautious here, because Egypt also had a practice of appointing a royal wife for ceremonial purposes. Now, it was, like, for example, in Egypt, a king had to do some of the religious ceremonies with his head wife, his great queen. And without that great queen, he couldn't finish the religious ceremony. So there were certain instances and certain periods of time when a great queen was appointed among the daughters to fill in as the religious proxy. Now, there's also some instances where the king was just a pervert. Okay, we gotta recognize that too. Like, for example, Khufu did this, and Khufu was a pervert. He married one of his daughters. But in the case of kings that lived a long time and would have lost their royal queens one after the other, it was a lot easier for a king to appoint a daughter as a stand-in until a new royal queen, great queen, could be married or appointed. And this is what happened in the case of Ramses II. Was his daughter was essentially a stand-in until she was replaced by the daughter of the Hittite emperor. The treaty that occurred in Ramses' 25th regnal year eventually led to an exchange of daughters between the Egyptian king and or not the Egyptian king, but because the Egyptians didn't give their daughters, but from the Hittite king. So there was this arranged marriage from the Hittite king, and she eventually became the great queen and replaced Ramses II's daughter as. So in reality, she was Ramses II's daughter was a proxy for religious purposes. We see this actually, interestingly enough, also happen during the reign of Queen Hatshepsut. Okay? She's got to appoint a great queen. She's the king. She's the pharaoh. She's a female. But Hatshepsut, in order to fulfill the duties of the religious ceremony, needs a great queen also. So she appoints one of her daughters to be the great queen. There's no sexual relationship happening there. But you have to have that proxy there. Now, the prohibition against incest in Leviticus 18, I think, has a completely different nature, which is that, well, let's face it, incest is bad. It ends up in bad results. And it ends up in abnormalities. And I think that during the time of Moses and onward, people were starting to recognize this. that it was unnatural, it was abnormal. And much of the Levitical law was to establish normalcy. For example, we know the text talks a lot about clean versus unclean. Think of it, I think clean versus unclean is not exactly the best way to translate that. I think it's better to translate it as normal versus abnormal. To the whole idea of cleanness is the idea of normalcy. Okay. So normalcy applied to just about every facet of Israelite life. It applied to the foods they ate. You can eat a cow but not a camel, because it's not a normal animal. It applies to the fibers you wear. You can wear flax or you can wear wool, but you don't combine the two. It's a blending of categories. That's abnormal. It applies to your houses. Okay, your house has mold. It's now not normal anymore. It's now toxic. Now it has to be cleaned. It also applies to human relationships and sexual practices. So, I think that's really what's undergirding the prohibition in Leviticus 19, is that whole idea of normalcy versus abnormalcy, clean versus unclean. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated, and great question. Okay, and Mr. Rich B.O.B. for $2. Thank you very much for the super chat. Thoughts on the Tower of Babel being that of Eridu? Okay. This is coming out of the idea of the Eridu expansion. Being that Tower of Babel was being essentially a ziggurat at Eridu, and then when the people were spread out, you get this expansion of people across the ancient Near East from Eridu. The problem with the Eridu expansion is that the evidence for this is very, very thin. Really thin. It postdates periods where we already have settlements around the ancient Near East. So during the so-called Eridu expansion, we already find settlements in Turkey, in China, in India, in Egypt. So I think the Eridu expansion is greatly overstated. The evidence for this is exceptionally thin. I think potentially Babel's even earlier than Eridu, potentially. I've got some evidential issues with the whole Eridu expansion thing. I know there's guys who really love it. I want to see more. I want to see more evidence before I subscribe to that theory. So that's my thoughts on that. I can't say a lot more on it because there's not much more to say on it, because there's not a lot of evidence concerning it. It's just really speculation and supposition, and I'm not a great fan of speculation and supposition, because it can really lead you down a yellow brick road where you end up not at the Wizard of Oz, but at the witch's castle. So, and I don't care for that. So anyway, I want to see more evidence before I really subscribe to anything like that. But I don't think the Eridu theory has a lot of legs to it. I think the evidence is thin, and it's just, well, Mr. Empty Conjecture. And Mr. Empty Conjecture would love this theory. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Catholic Convert for $1.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. Are you familiar with Jungian types? Sensing, etc. Not really. Psychology was not really an interest of mine. So, I know Jordan Peterson's really into this. He's a Jungian psychologist. I don't listen that much to, say, Jordan Peterson. I wasn't really that interested in psychology in college. I mean, I did some foundational courses in psychology, but not really enough to understand Jung. So I'm going to have to plead some ignorance here because it's just not my field. And it's not even a field I have, say, even a foundational knowledge of. So, do appreciate the super chat. Unfortunately, I can't answer every question. So, but again, I do appreciate the super chat. Thank you very much. Okay, Michael Letourneau for $5 Canadian. Thank you very much for the super chat. What is your take on Mark 13:19, the eschaton? P.S. Love the stream. Well, thank you so much. We love the fact that people are enjoying these live streams. It's hard to believe it's almost been a year. Yikes. We never thought that these streams would go as long as they did. I mean, we were kind of thinking, okay, 3 weeks people would lose interest and then we move on. And then we do them every so often, every 6 weeks or something like that. But people have been loving this. So, we enjoy doing them. We really enjoy doing it. Yeah, this is just fun. As I said before, it's the highlight of my week. So let's get that text up. So Mark 13:19. Okay. I'm just going to take a peek at the Greek here. It always helps to take a peek at the Greek. Okay. Esontai gar, I hemerai, ekanai, thlipsis, wia u, gekeno, toite, ap arches, Ketisis ein ektisen Otheos. Eos tu nun kai ume genetai. Okay. So let's read the text. In English this time. For those days will be a time of tribulation such as not has occurred since the beginning of creation, which God has created until now and shall never be. And unless the Lord had shortened those days, no life would have been saved, but for the sake of the elect he shortened those days. Okay. Anything? Yeah, okay. Now, it is talking essentially about the eschaton being, the last things. Eschaton, the final events. Comes out of the word eschatology, last things, or the study of last things. But the eschaton is the idea of the second coming, the coming of the Son of Man. And basically what we have here is sort of guidelines in sort of Mark 13 of what's not going to happen. It just talks about tribulation. But it also talks, like, for example, earlier in the text, it'll talk about there'll be wars, rumors of wars, pestilence, disease, famine. And it says, do not worry, for these are to come, but this is not the end. So he's basically saying those are not the signs of the end times. Okay? Then it starts getting, if that's sort of the, well, this is just life. How bad must the tribulation be? Honestly. If the wars, the rumors of wars, the famines, the pestilence, if that's just leading up to this, Gee. Ew. Okay. But here it also says too that these days will be tribulation, such has not occurred since the beginning of creation, which God created. Okay, so essentially, since the 6 days of creation until now, and never shall. So this is the baddest of bad times. This is as bad as it gets. So, Christ in many ways is telling you, okay, yeah, when it comes, it's going to be bad. Which is why he tells you those, the believers, when you see the people of the prince who is to come. He's telling them two things. Let's see here. Verse 14, when you see the abomination of desolation standing where it should not be, let the reader understand. And let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let him who is on the housetop not go down or enter in to get anything from his house. And let him who is in the field not turn back to get his cloak. Essentially hightail it out of town. Okay? That's basically, and this is why a lot of the Christians in when Jerusalem got surrounded by the Romans, basically were spared because they remember this and they hightailed it out of town. They left. So that's. But it also means that there's going to be another event that's going to be very, very similar that's yet to come. So, I'm going to be very honest here. I take a futurist view of this. Okay, I take a futurist view. I'm not dogmatic about eschatology. It's not something I don't think is worth being dogmatic over. If you're happy being a preterist, fine. If you're happy being a pre-tribulationalist, fine. I'm neither, but I also I do read this with a futurist view. Okay, so for me, that's what makes sense. And frankly, nothing has been so bad that it has not been basically superseded by something worse. And this is why, for example, in verse 19, when it talks about this being, the worst of the worst, these are the, let's see. For these days will be a time of tribulation such as not occurred since the beginning of creation until now and never shall. Okay, the siege of Jerusalem, 70 AD was bad. Okay, it was bad. There was reports of cannibalism. Jewish families would steal their neighbors' babies and eat them. We have records of that happening. So it was a really bad siege. Okay. But does it compare to the horrors of World War II? And you got to really answer that question. The horrors of World War II far exceeded the horrors of the siege of Jerusalem. 70 AD. Not even close. Not even close. And this is making a prediction that this is going to be the worst event in human history. So this is why I'm very, very skeptical of, say, preterist positions. Because there's a lot of hyperbolic language regarding the eschaton that I just don't think preterism rises to the bar. So I'm glad you love the stream. That's my take on say the eschaton here, particularly the tribulation. And it's just come straight out of the text. So I think there's a lot here that we can just read and sort of say, okay, yeah, it's going to be bad days. Bad days. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. And I'm glad you love the streams. Okay. Then we got Anthony Rougier here for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat, and it's good to see you here tonight. Thoughts on Asherah and Yahweh being worshipped together? Also, any opinion on the Kuntillet Ajrud inscription? Yes, I do have an opinion on this. I think one of the things we have to understand about Asherah is it sort of changes. Now, one of the things about the Kuntillet Ajrud inscription is the caption text. It's actually a series of potsherds. And the text is not exactly aligned with the iconography. Okay? The other thing is the text basically says Yahweh and his Asherah. Not a name. Asherah in the Kuntillet Ajrud inscription is not a name. It's something else. So it seems to have been an inanimate object, not the name of, say, his wife. So when I've heard some of these papers at conferences, try to make the case that Asherah in the Kuntillet Ajrud inscription is the wife of Yahweh. But that doesn't seem to bear out from the inscription. They forget that. They forget that definite, that possessive pronoun there. And I think that possessive pronoun really changes the character of the inscription. With that said, however, what the Asherah seems to be, though, is a votive pole. And there is a weak link, actually, between a weak etymological link between Asherah and Osiris. And one of the things we find, we know, for example, we call the Asherah is often called an Asherah pole, sometimes an Asherah tree. And that's very interesting right there. And what makes that so interesting is when we look at, say, the what's sometimes called the Osiris fetish. It's basically a great big tree trunk with the head of Osiris carved on top. It's a big tree trunk. It's a votive pole. Very interesting. It's very interesting. And in Egyptian, Osiris is Ashir or Oshir. You got that Aleph Sheen there, and the Resh. That Usur. It's etymologically exceptionally similar to Asherah. The only difference is really that etymologically is that final hey. That feminization of it. Now, why is it feminized in is an Asherah pole feminized in say Semitic and not Egyptian? I don't know. But there is some very interesting comparisons there. Very, very similar in practice. Very, very similar in etymology. But I don't think automatically that Asherah was the wife of Yahweh. So, but I do think they might have been worshipped together because one might have been the representative of the other. Just like the Osiris, it's called the Tawer fetish in Egyptian. The Tawer fetish. The Tawer fetish represented, basically, it was kind of an idol of Osiris. But as I said, great big tree trunk. Likewise, Asherah could have been a great big tree trunk representing Yahweh. It's possible. So, that's my opinion on Asherah and Yahweh and the Kuntillet Ajrud inscription. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay. And we are getting close to the end of the super chats here. We got a super chat here from Big Red Dog for $9.99. Okay. Thank you very much for the super chat. Ska name, Cold Crank and Amps of Egypt.
I know that one. Wait. I gotta get you.
Well, Cold Crank and Amps. All right. I can think of a ska name for an Egyptian themed band. How about the Canopic Jars? Yes. Well, I'm still not gonna start a ska band though. But I appreciate the naming suggestion, and I very, very much appreciate the super chat. Thank you very much for the super chat, and very, very amusing. Okay. Cole Walker for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. In keeping with tonight's title theme, next week Congress is holding the first public UFO hearings in 50 years. Any thoughts on what could be going on? I have some thoughts. I think UFO are a real phenomena. I think they're a real phenomena. They have had encounters with in aircraft that have been detected on more than one sensory apparatus. Okay. Now, modern aircraft, modern fighter jets have a variety of different sensors. They've got radar. They have got infrared tracking. You got the pilot's own vision and visual cameras. Some of these have had been detected on more than one sensory device. If it's on more than one sensory device, it's less likely to be a glitch or a mirage or a hallucination by the pilot. So, right now, we don't know what they are. And frankly, I don't think the government does either. And I think that's what they're concerned about. It's not so much that they are concerned that... I don't think this is that they are concerned that, there's a possibility that, China is developing new technologies that might be penetrating our airspace. I don't think Russia's capable of it. Look, they can't even they can't even carry out a competent campaign into Ukraine. I don't think Russia's in any state to do highly sophisticated surveillance aircraft over American space. They just can't. The Russians just at this point just can't get their act together. Their whole invasion of Ukraine has just gone belly up. It's been an embarrassment, really. Not that I'm cheering the Russians on, but which I'm not. But I don't think they're capable of something as sophisticated as a surveillance plane that could imitate a UFO. So I think that's what's got the U.S. government concerned is nobody knows what this is, and that's got them very concerned that something that they don't know can get close enough to one of their fighter jets to be an airspace violation. So, anyway, that's my thoughts. I do have some other thoughts that I'm not going to publicly disclose, maybe later I will, but still need to reflect a bit more before I choose to say more on this. But I think that's what we, at the moment, this is what we know. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Jack Gregory for $2. Thank you very much for the super chat. Thoughts on the documentary hypothesis by Umberto Cossuto? Very good work. Very good work. It's dated now. It's dated. Umberto Cossuto was an early critic of the... I mean, it wasn't really early. He did this in the 1970s. But he was a critic of the documentary hypothesis. And he was one of the first leading scholars to really sort of, expose the deficiencies in the documentary hypothesis. Now, my problem with Cossuto is not him per se. I think what he did was very, very, very thorough piece of work. I mean, he was an excellent scholar. Excellent scholar. I use some of his work myself. I mean, I think his work is really fantastic. I mean, and it's aged well, too, for the most part. Although, as I said, his work on the documentary hypothesis is now a bit long in the tooth. And that's more because the documentary hypothesis has changed, not because his criticisms were invalid. But I think that he's a very nuanced scholar. He's a very nuanced scholar, and I think a lot of people just take his work on the documentary hypothesis and say, well, this is the corpus of Umberto Cossuto's work, and say, try to interpret everything else using that work, which is a misapplication of his work. So I think it can be very problematic, like how some people have used his work on the documentary hypothesis, because they don't always understand how nuanced a scholar and how sort of wide Cossuto's range was, and it was really wide. He was a very thorough scholar, very thorough. But he's one of those guys that's so thorough that you can't encapsulate his thinking in one book. It covers articles. It covers, a lot of what he wrote was in Italian, and much of it still hasn't been translated. So one has to be very, very careful not to draw too wide conclusions from, say, any particular passage of Cossuto. But it's good work. It's really good work, and it's very thorough, and I really enjoy it myself. Even though I think his work on the documentary hypothesis has now been superseded by better works. Like Joshua Berman's book is really good. I highly recommend his book on the documentary hypothesis. So, anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, we are almost at the 3-hour mark here, which is good because I think we are at the end of the super chats. Awesome, we're at the end of the super chats. Let's take a few more non-super chats and then call it a night. Okay. And I'm scanning now for that Q colon, so if I don't see it, I have passed it by. Okay, I'll take this one here. Magistrate Mike. He asks, if you had to make a guess, where was the Garden of Eden located? Ooh, that's a tough one. Because a lot of that's going to depend upon what your view of the flood is. If your view of the flood is a local flood, you'll probably think it's in Mesopotamia somewhere. Okay? If your view is a global flood, it could potentially be anywhere. because Edom itself is defined by being 4 analogical rivers. Okay, 4 analogical rivers that are basically form the borders of Eden. And so it's really hard. I mean, if you believe in a global flood, it'll be almost impossible to nail it down where. If you believe in a local flood, you're probably going to say northern Mesopotamia is all likely what you're going to say. So, I don't really have a guess here. Could it be in northern Mesopotamia? Possibly. Could it be somewhere else? Possibly. Again, we're dealing with a deficit of data. We don't know. There's not enough information because we don't know where those rivers exactly ran, and if they were reshaped somehow by the flood, either local or global. So there's just not enough information here to actually make a good guess. But it's a good question, and if we knew, we could probably say, but we don't. So anyway, thank you very much for the question. Okay. And all right, actually, that is all the non-super chats we have. Believe it or not, because we had to restart the.
Swiftsy had asked one.
Okay, we'll have to probably do this one by hand then. What did Swift? Maybe I can go up here and I can see.
I have copied it. It's Leviticus 17:11 says, "For the blood makes atonement by means of life." In Leviticus 5:11 it says, "If someone cannot afford 2 pigeons, turtles, you may sacrifice flour." Is this a contradiction? Because the flour is not blood sacrifice.
Sacrifice. Sorry, what? Where is it?
Leviticus 17:11.
17:11. Okay. We'll pull that off here for a moment here. Okay, Swiftseer, we're going to try to take your question here. So, my wife has recorded it down, so let's pull up the Bible here. Okay. Leviticus 17:11. For the life of the flesh is in the blood, for I have given it to you on the altar to make atonement for your souls, but it is blood by the reason of life that makes atonement. Okay. So this is the atonement sacrifice.
In Leviticus 5:11, it says if someone cannot afford 2 pigeons or turtle doves.
Wait. 5:11. Okay. All right, I see it. Okay, let me get the context here. Okay, it's a sin offering. Verse 11. But if his means are insufficient for 2 turtle doves, okay, or 2 young pigeons, then his offering for that which he has sinned, he shall bring 1/10 of an ephah of fine flour for a sin offering, and he shall not put oil in it or place incense on it, for it is sin offering. Okay.
So his question is this contradiction because the flour is not a blood sacrifice?
17 here. Okay. I think what we have in Leviticus 17 is a general principle. And I think that's what's going on in Leviticus 17:11 is we have a general principle of sacrifice and atonement going on there. Okay? But the specifics of Leviticus 5. Okay? And this is a sin offering. And does it tell us exactly which one? Okay, it's hata, so it's just sin. Oh, okay, there's more going on here, too. Okay. There's something else going on here. This is not specifically a sin offering. Let's take the whole passage here, because this is going to clarify a lot. Leviticus 5 verse 1. Now, if a person sins after he hears a public adjuration to testify when he is a witness, whether he has seen or otherwise known, if he does not tell it, then he will bear guilt. Or if a person touches an unclean thing, whether a carcass or of an unclean beast, or the carcass of unclean cattle, or a carcass of unclean swarming things, though it is hidden from him, he is unclean. Then he'll be guilty. Or if he touches human uncleanliness, whatever sort of his uncleanliness may it be with him, which he becomes unclean, it is hidden from him, and then he comes to know it, he will be guilty. Or if a person swears thoroughly with his lips to do evil or to do good in whatever manner the man may speak thoughtlessly with an oath, it is hidden from him, then he becomes to know it, he will be guilty of one of these. So it shall be when he becomes guilty of one of these that he shall confess that in which he has sinned. He shall also bring his guilt offering to the Lord for his sin. It's a guilt offering, not an atonement offering. That's why he can do the ephah of flour instead. Okay, this is a guilt offering. Now, we have to understand that in this sacrificial system, that there are more than one types of offerings. Okay? Blood is required for the covering of sin, but there's also other types of offerings as well. There's guilt offerings, there's thanksgiving offerings, there's praise offerings. I think there's 7 different types of offerings in the sacrificial system. Not all of them require the spilling of blood. For something like this, and this is pretty broad, this is a guilt offering. So it would be done in, say, conjunction with a sin offering, an atonement offering. Okay? So this would not be to say cover your sins, but to say cover the guilt, or to satisfy the guilt. So this is why it's really a small amount here. It's like 2 turtle doves or young pigeons. This is not killing of a goat or a lamb or anything. This is not a big sacrifice. This is not like Yom Kippur. This is not where, say, the sacrifice or even Passover, where you're using, say, blood as the covering here. You do have, say, blood if you can afford it, but if you cannot afford it, fine flour is sufficient here for a guilt offering, because it covers this particular offering covers more than just, say, the guilt of sin. It covers uncleanness. It's a purification offering as well. So this is one of those situations where we have one offering that does more than one thing at once. And it does happen, where some of these offerings are covering more than one situation. So whereas the sin offering covers, say, the guilt of trespass or iniquity, doesn't cover rebellion. Rebellion is only covered at Yom Kippur. Okay. But while the sin offering will cover, say, trespass or iniquity, this is covering other situations as well. The guilt offering is also covering, say, ritual uncleanness. So if you touch a corpse, you're unclean. You haven't actually sinned. But you bear the guilt of uncleanness because you may have contaminated someone else. So that still requires an offering to at least wipe the slate clean for uncleanness. So this is why, in this particular case, blood is preferred but not necessary. So there's a concession made so that even the poorest person can be absolved, can be purified of their uncleanness. This allows, say, even the poorest person to become, say, still active in the religious community. If you didn't have this, poor people are in contact with unclean things all the time. Your poorest members of society are in contact with dead bodies, with unclean food, all sorts of things that, that, say, more wealthier people wouldn't have to be atoned for. So this concession was almost needed, where it's a really inexpensive, say, like for example in verse 6, part of it, for if you're wealthy, lamb or a goat for a sin offering. Okay, but in the case here of, say, verse 7, he can't afford a lamb, then he shall bring to the Lord for his guilt an offering for that which he has sinned, 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons. So again, next step down. So if you can afford it, if you're wealthy, lamb or a goat. You're not wealthy, okay, 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons. Can't afford that, an ephod of fine grain. Because the point here is not just that this covers sins. It can cover other circumstances as well. So that's why it's a little broader here. The guilt offering is a little broader here. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you for the question. It's an interesting question, yeah, because I should at some point do an entire video on the sacrificial system and the 7 types of sacrifice, because it is very broad and there's a lot of categories and there's actually a lot of confusion over it. And it's not always over sin. As I said, sometimes there's a sacrifice for a oath fulfillment. You do an oath and you fulfill the oath, you're supposed to bring an offering to the Lord, a sacrifice to the Lord. If you want to thank the Lord, you bring an offering to the Lord. You want to forgive your sins covered over, you bring an atonement for sins. You need to be purified of being ritually unclean, you bring an offering to the Lord. Each one of these is different, and the circumstances surrounding them are different. So some of what we have to do is tease out what exactly are the circumstances under which these offerings are given, are being made. Sometimes it is for, covering over sin to carry on business. Other times there's more going on. There's absolution. And sometimes it's a combination. Sometimes it's both. Sometimes you bring more than one offering. In this particular case, this is an offering that does double duty. It'll be a sin offering, but it can also be an absolution of uncleanness as well. If you break an oath, okay, now you got to do 2 offerings. You got to do one for the oath, and then one for the fact you broke it. So that happened too. So anyway, thank you, SwiftC, for the question. It's an interesting question. I'm sorry we couldn't get it up there, but we do appreciate every question. Now, I'm going to see if we have any last stragglers. One more straggler left?
Jack Gregory, $2.
Oh, we got another super chat. Okay, cool. Lovely. All right.
We'll end it with a super chat.
we will end it with the super chat because we're over 3 hours now, and I do need to get some sleep tonight.
Murney's up here. She wants dinner too.
Everyone wants dinner. All right. Jack Gregory, thank you very much for the super chat. We really appreciate it. Okay, and this will be the final question for the night. Okay, clues to parts of the Torah being older than JPE and D. All right. Let me think now. The oldest of the letters, I don't remember which one it is, if it's the Yahwist or the Elohist, is supposed to date to 950 BC. The youngest is supposed to date to roughly the Persian period, about 500 BC. I think there are parts of the Torah that are much older. Much older. I would go as far as, say, late Bronze Age, 1300 BC. Okay? Perhaps not in final edited form, but at least its core texts. And the reason I'd say this is because we find information in the Torah, particularly the books of Genesis and Exodus, that show information that would have only be known to somebody in Egypt, essentially. And moreover than that, some of those texts, like for example, Exodus chapter 2, show vocabulary that dates to essentially late Egyptian, basically late Egyptian loanwords. A really good book on this was done by Benjamin Noonan. I highly recommend that book, where he talks about loanwords in the Pentateuch and the Bible, the Old Testament in general, but he's specifically focused on the Pentateuch. And it's very, very clear from Noonan's analysis that there's a strong predilection towards Egyptian loanwords in the Pentateuch that you don't see in later works of the Old Testament. So the whole idea that parts of the Torah date to the Persian period, I think, is ridiculous. You know, we don't find, say, Old Iranian loanwords, which is Persians highly influenced by. So we don't find that in the Pentateuch, not at all. We find that in like the later prophets. So definitely we do find that in the Old Testament. We just don't find that in the Torah. We've got certain forms of vocabulary, particularly of Egyptian loanwords, that preserve, say, the Middle Egyptian forms that will then later transition in, say, the late Ramesside period. So that indicates that we're dealing with a text that's roughly in the 13th century, at least in its core texts. We also have a whole lot of geographic and toponymic place name data, which all dates to the 13th century and really would not have been known to somebody in even the first millennium BC. You know, first millennium, you wouldn't find it. So, I think there are definitely things in the Torah that are much, much older than what JPE and D's documented hypothesis suggests. So, if you want more information, you can look up my series on evidence for the Exodus on my YouTube channel. There's a whole lot of stuff. And there's a whole lot of indication that at least parts of the Torah are much, much older than, say, critical scholarship would claim today. And I think late Bronze Age kind of older. So, anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. And with that is going to be our final question for the night. I want to thank everyone who's joined us tonight. I want to thank all the super chatters who gave us some great questions tonight, and we really appreciate the support of this channel. The super chats do really provide for us an important source of income that help us carry on this work. I want to again make a shout out to my Patreon supporters. I want to thank you all very much for supporting us and this channel. And I also want to just thank everyone who just joined us tonight, didn't provide a super chat, and just participated in the conversation. One of the things we really are trying to do is build a community here of people who, as we said earlier in the live stream, who are learning how to think biblically, how to think logically, not what to think. So this is one of the reasons why we do take these step-by-step processes of how to reason this stuff out, is because that's what we're trying to do, is build a community that's excited about ancient Near East and the Bible, and how to do it properly. And we just are really excited about this community and all the people who've joined us here, from various different groups and beliefs, and yet still share this common love for this stuff. So with that said, I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. Glad you could be with us, and I will see you next time on Ancient Egypt and the Bible. Good night, everyone.